everybody. I'm Nick from Building Indiana, and I'm joined today with two experts from the trucking and logistics fields. We have Gary Langston in the upper left-hand corner here. He's the president and CEO of the Indiana Motor Truck Association. And down in the bottom frame, we have Bryce Carpenter. He is the senior vice president of industry engagement with Conexus Indiana. And this week, we've all been talking back and forth and emailing. We've been working on an article about electrified heavy haul vehicles like semi-trucks and other equipment like that. And I see a lot of news about heavy electrified trucks. I see reports that they're great for the environment. I see reports from manufacturers, but I never get to hear the trucking industry's perspective on it, which seems to be the most important party to reach out to. So really, the first question that I had for you guys was, from the trucking industry's perspective, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of electrified semi-trucks?
Gary, I will defer to you.
Well, I think it's important to start off with the understanding that there isn't a loud clamoring from the trucking industry for electrification. The primary reasons that carriers are engaging and focusing on electrification is more having to do with requests or demands from shippers who might say, unless your trucks are electric, you don't get to come onto my property and pick up my products. That's one. From a public relations perspective, from a business development perspective, it's good to be green in many areas. And so announcing that you're buying one truck is a start, we're buying 10 and 5 are electric. We're going to see how this goes. So from a public relations perspective, there certainly are carriers and the industry who does care about environmental sustainability. It's not that we don't, and the work that we've done in cleaning up diesel over the last few decades is phenomenal. I mean, today it's the case that 70 trucks emits less NOx and pollution than one truck did in 1988. So it's not like we've just been sitting around waiting for something. We work on that regularly. But and then compliance, another advantage, I guess, or a pro is that to be in compliance with the local areas that you're working in, the legislation and regulations that we're starting to see in many places requires a focus on the electrification.
Okay.
Yeah, just to follow up on Gary's statement, I think it's a short-term versus a long-term viewpoint, right? In the short term, I don't know that there is an advantage to pursuing heavy fleet electrification. The technology, the weight are not there. This is an industry that has been hit hard by challenges through the pandemic. Cost of adopting this equipment into the fleets is hard to justify given some of the short-term carrier contracts that a lot of these trucking companies are operating under. But long-term, once the technology catches up with the business model on range and weight and hours of service that it'll be able to operate, I do think there are advantages, but it's like anything with the business industry is you've got to reconcile the advantages with the cost of acquiring that technology.
That's for sure. I think then we actually kind of already answered my second question a little bit, and that was pertaining to adoption. But so it does seem that a lot of the pressures on the trucking industry are coming from a lot of different directions then with regard to sustainability. You had mentioned clients or customers, and then I'm assuming heavy facilities like ports. They might have their own agenda in terms of modernization. So yeah, it definitely seems like the move to be more sustainable is coming from many sides, and trucking, as we know it, is one industry that affects every other industry. So how have you then, from from all the companies you work with, all the shippers you work with, are they wary of adoption of greater electrification, or are they kind of just waiting to see what their requirements are going to be and go from that?
I'll defer there to Bryce. First of all, you work probably more directly with the warehousing and logistics folks.
Yeah, I think it's a requirements play, right? One of the great things about the infrastructure bill that was done at the federal level is it made a lot of resources available to states to continue to evaluate and test these technologies. But by no means is this technology ready to be deployed at scale overnight. So where shippers and warehousing and distribution, they are trying to prepare for what the needs will be, but I don't think anybody has a realistic time frame for widespread adoption or exactly what that adoption is going to look like. With Cummins here within the state, there's a lot of talk around hydrogen fuel cells, and then that being a really good landing point in between diesel and an all electric fleet. There's a lot of advantages to hydrogen fuel cells. So are we looking at a freight network that is a composite around electrified fleets for in the short term and hydrogen fuel cells for the long haul routes? And then how do fulfillment providers organize their facilities to service the different types of trucks that are coming in? So I think that the technology in justifying the business case is going to have to be first in order for a lot of these shippers, truckers, and warehousing and fulfillment people in order to dedicate the funding at a time when, again, we've talked a lot about inflation. We've seen what's happened with costs the last couple of years. Just moving goods the conventional way has become incredibly complex and expensive. And I think it's a very, very difficult thing to then put additional pressure on businesses to say, not only are you dealing with this complexity of the normal way of moving goods, but oh, by the way, let's spend money on technology that is still in development. Let's make these commitments and hope we get it right.
Interesting.
There are a lot of applications now that the spotters, the lot spotters at spotting trailers at docks. That's a great application. The local regional kinds of applications are progressing well. For a 175 to 250 mile range, those work well because you're in and out each day and have plenty of time to recharge and those kinds of things. On the Class 8 side, that's far away. I mean, the OEMs will tell you that we aren't close to being ready for that. And as I mentioned before we started, Nick, I really believe, and I don't know that it'll happen, but I think if we could somehow convince the OEMs to adopt a more collaborative as opposed to competitive effort in this development, because there are a lot of really bright people that are engaged in trying to advance this and trying to be first. And I suppose when there's as much possible revenue involved as there will be when this is developed, I see how that works. But I really like to see a more collaborative environment than we've seen so far.
Yes, they are all working on separate tech, aren't they?
Yeah.
And to follow up, Gary mentioned spotters. Another application that we've seen currently is Ports of Indiana up at Burns Harbor launched a pilot for electrified fleet mobility within their port area up there. And I think that that's going to be what we see first. So these tightly controlled environments, short range, they're never far away from the predictable access to electricity, and being able to utilize the electric movement there is what people can commit to now. I mean, we work closely with Conexus, with the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. We were talking to a Swedish-based company yesterday that works on fleet electrification with sort of a longer term play into autonomy. But that's still in the testing and development phase. They have some operations that are deployed on public roadways in Europe and are looking at that here. But the more controlled the environment, the shorter the trips, the more routine the activity is. That's what's going to be utilized first.
I actually think
Bryce,
it's wonderful. It's wonderful that you mentioned that detail about the ports, because we had saved some bits and pieces on that for this very same article that we've been discussing. So that micro experiment in this. I'm sorry, Gary, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to follow up. I'm not sure if Bryce mentioned this earlier, but one of the biggest obstacles is the infrastructure and the development of the infrastructure, which is hugely expensive to do, particularly for any kind of long range thing. I heard President Biden say just this week, maybe, or last week at the latest, that his goal is to develop an infrastructure where it will be as easy to find a fast charging electric station as it is to find a gas station. So, but that's a long way away, and that's very expensive. And so there are just so many obstacles to actually seeing this happen. Insurance companies, they don't know what to do when they talk about, hey, if I buy some electric trucks, how much will my insurance be? And they're like, we don't know. We need more data. We need to wait until we can get some more data on these local, regional, port kinds of movements and see how the performance is and the reliability and the safety and all the things that go with these. And then we'll be able to tell you better.
There is definitely a lot happening right now, but I really appreciate both your time and your knowledge, both of you. We have Gary from the Indiana Motor Truck Association and Bryce from Conexus Indiana. Thank you for your time and your knowledge. We appreciate you very much. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks very much, Nick.
Thank you.